Today, we're doing a deep dive into something that's been, well, decades in the making.
It's the updated EU-Mercosur Partnership Agreement, or UEMETA 2024.
And this thing is absolutely massive. You're connecting the European Union with the Mercosur bloc.
That's right. Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We're talking about two economic zones that, combined, account for nearly a quarter of the world's GDP.
I mean, that's a serious counterweight to the U.S. and China,
Yeah.
strategically speaking.
It is. But after this just agonizing 25-year negotiation, it was finalized on December 6, 2024, and boom, immediate intense rejection.
Right, especially from farmers across Europe. And that friction, that rejection is really what we want to focus on today.
Exactly. We're not here to argue if this is a good or bad deal.
No.
Our mission is to look at the deeper structural conflict. Why does a seemingly rational, huge economic agreement face such fierce social opposition?
We're going to frame this whole thing as an OS compatibility error.
An operating system error. I like that.
Yeah, you've got this lightning-fast global trade system, all about efficiency, crashing right into the slow-moving, deeply rooted system of local life and culture.
So we need to trace the history, to see the drivers, and then really map out where these two operating systems are grinding against each other.
And it's important to say this isn't a sudden thing. This friction has been building for decades.
It really has.
Okay, so let's rewind. Negotiations started way back in 1999.
1999. And they were just characterized by these long periods of nothing happening.
Right, just inertia. And then they got to a political agreement in 2019, UMETA 2019, but it stalled almost immediately.
It hit a wall.
What was the wall? After 2 decades of work, what stopped it?
The block was primarily environmental and political. Specifically, after 2019, deforestation rates in Brazil shot up.
Right, under Bolsonaro.
Exactly. And that led to just intense opposition inside the EU, which basically forced them to halt everything and demand much, much stronger environmental commitments.
So while the deal was on ice, say, between 2019 and 2023, the EU didn't just sit around. They've started moving on their own.
They moved unilaterally. They basically decided they weren't going to wait for Mercosur to meet their standards and just started passing their own regulations for imports.
And those were the big ones we hear about, right? The EUDR and CBAM.
Precisely. The regulation on deforestation-free products, the EUDR, and the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM.
And for Mercosur, this wasn't just some new paperwork.
Oh, no. To them, these were new trade hurdles. They felt like the goalposts were being moved, potentially undermining all the benefits they were promised in the first place.
So that sets the stage for the big push in 2024. Both sides clearly had a lot of skin in the game. From the EU side, what was driving them to get this done now?
It was all about geopolitical and economic resilience.
Yeah.
The EU is incredibly focused on, strategic autonomy, securing its supply chains.
After all the recent disruptions.
Of course. And maybe more importantly, they were desperate to regain some economic ground in the region. They'd lost a lot to China.
So this is partly the EU trying to muscle back into Latin America.
Absolutely. China became Mercosur's top trading partner in 2017. So the EU's offensive interests were clear. Get market access for their high-value stuff.
Like cars. I saw some of those tariffs were up to 35%.
As high as 35%. So opening that door was huge. They also wanted access for machinery, and this is critical, protection for over 350 European geographical indications. GIs.
Okay, so for anyone who isn't familiar, what are GIs and why is that such a big deal for the EU?
GIs protect the names of specific products, like Parmesan cheese or Bordeaux wine, that are tied to where they're from and how they're made.
So it's like a trademark for a region.
It's intellectual property, and locking that down is a massive win for European producers. It means competitors in Mercosur can't just start selling their own Parmesan.
Okay, so what about the other side of the coin? What did Mercosur want? What were their non-negotiables?
Their strategy was pretty straightforward. Maximize agricultural exports.
Beef, poultry, sugar.
All of it. They wanted to get it into the EU market through new or much bigger tariff rate quotas, or TRQs.
And TRQs are, they're basically a set amount of a product you can import at a lower tariff.
That's right. It's guaranteed access at a good price.
Yeah.
Defensively, they wanted really long phase-in periods for EU industrial goods to protect their own industries.
And they needed to know how these new EU rules, like the EUDR, were actually going to work in practice.
Yes, they wanted clarity. They didn't want the rules to just wipe out the benefits of the deal.
So with all these conflicting interests, the 2024 agreement was called a delicate rebalancing. What did that actually look like, especially on the environmental side, the original deal breaker?
The compromise really focused on making sustainability legally enforceable. They included the Paris Agreement as an essential element of the deal.
Which sounds technical, but it's a huge legal move, right?
It's massive.
Yeah.
It means if a party breaches the Paris Agreement, pulls out or just fails to meet its commitments, that could actually trigger a suspension of the entire trade deal.
Wow, so it gives the environmental side real teeth, a nuclear option.
Does this? It's leverage the EU didn't have in 2019. And they added an annex to the sustainability chapter that spelled out exactly how the EUDR risk system would work, trying to give Mercosur that clarity they wanted.
So a very sophisticated institutional fix.
Very. It was designed to get countries like France and Austria on board.
And yet here we are, facing this intense rejection on the ground. Which brings us to the farmer's dilemma. The opposition is just so concentrated in the EU agricultural sector. We see the tractor blockades, the protests. They call it a cars for cows deal.
And that phrase is it's so powerful because it perfectly simplifies that core imbalance they feel.
European cars for South American cows.
Exactly. Selling high-value industrial goods in exchange for letting in low-cost, high-volume agricultural products. And this isn't just a slogan. It points to a real economic asymmetry.
So what's the specific argument about the production costs and the regulations?
Their core point is that Mercosur farmers just have a massive cost advantage, lower costs for land, for labor, for capital.
Okay.
But the real kicker, the part that feels so unfair to them, is the regulatory burden. They argue that Mercosur producers just don't have to meet the same strict EU standards.
For the environment, animal welfare, food safety, all that stuff.
All of it. What we call SPS, or phytosanitary measures.
So an EU farmer pays more to meet, say, a high animal welfare standard, but then has to compete on price with imported beef that didn't have to bear that same cost.
You've just hit the absolute crux of the problem. EU farmers are forced to internalize these high regulatory costs, which society demands, but there's no way for them to externalize those costs when competing on the market.
But wait a second. You said the new beef quota, for example, is only 99,000 tons. That's just 1.6% of total EU consumption.
It is.
So if the volume is that small, why is the reaction so huge? Isn't that an overreaction?
And that's the question that moves us from just talking about trade numbers to talking about the structural problem. The threat isn't the 1.6%.
It's qualitative.
It is qualitative and systemic. It sets a precedent. It threatens to depress prices across the entire sector.
So even a small volume of cheaper imports can set a new, lower price ceiling for everyone.
Precisely. And this is where the local OS in Europe just collides head-on with that global free trade OS.
Because for these protesters, agriculture isn't just an industry.
It is not an industry to be optimized. It's viewed as culture, as stewardship of the land, as generational continuity, and, frankly, as food security.
So the global OS sees a farm as an economic input you can move around the globe for efficiency, but the local OS sees it as an immovable cultural asset.
And the global OS is blind to that value. That's the disconnect. And the system fails because what we can call the asymmetry error.
Okay.
The global architecture, even with all its fancy new sustainability clauses, just fails to account for that mismatch between environmental rules and price competition. When you demand high standards at home and then open your market to imports that don't have them, you are structurally guaranteeing you will have local losers.
Which makes this whole Umulata 2024 situation a perfect log, a perfect record of that clash. The rule-driven global OS versus the local life OS.
It's the foundational conflict of our time. And what makes it so much worse is the speed mismatch, what systems analysts call shear.
Shear, tell us more about that. How do these systems move at different speeds?
Okay, think about the high-speed layer. That's the global OS. It's geopolitics, finance, trade rules. This layer can adapt really quickly.
Right. We saw them add those complex sustainability clauses to the 2024 text in just a matter of months.
Exactly. Months. Now think about this slow-moving layer, the local life OS, the reality of a farming community.
That moves at the speed of generations.
Infinitely slower. It's tied to inherited land, local time. The pace of change is glacial. So when you slice these fast-moving global rules into that slow, deeply rooted reality, you get intense friction heat.
So a decision that looked perfectly logical from 30,000 feet, getting cheaper beef or better access for cars, is felt on the ground as a sudden, irreversible loss.
An irreversible loss of economic viability, of culture, of a way of life. The source material we reviewed suggests that the global system, in its hunt for efficiency, basically consumes non-reversible assets.
Culture, agriculture, the environment, things you can't just get back once they're gone.
And this leads to what we called systemic blindness. The global free trade OS gets stuck in a self-justification loop.
How so?
It tends to see the social rejection, the farmers in the streets, as just temporary noise.
The belief being that once the economic benefits show up, everyone will calm down.
Exactly. But this blindness, this refusal to see the fundamental incompatibility, it just makes the global structures more rigid. It prevents any real integration with local needs.
It's like trying to fix a hardware failure with a software patch.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And they did try to build in some patches. You Made It 2024 has these very sophisticated institutional mechanisms.
Like the rebalancing mechanism.
Right, which is basically a non-violation complaint mechanism, sort of like you'd find at the WTO.
So how does that work, and why isn't it enough?
It's designed to handle future unforeseen problems. Say, a new domestic rule in one country accidentally cancels out a trade benefit for the other. It's a way to solve legal disputes about the rules.
I see.
The deal also includes cooperation efforts to help small farmers and indigenous communities in Mercosur.
Okay, so the fixes are about legal compliance and softening the blow for the exporters in Mercosur. But they don't touch the root problem for the EU farmer.
They don't touch the structural asymmetry in production costs. They're highly evolved legal tools, but they cannot force the market to pay a price that reflects the cost of European standards.
So even the billion-euro compensation fund that was announced.
That's an external bandage on an internal structural wound. It's aid. It's not systemic integration.
So if we step all the way back, how should you listening understand this whole UMETA 2024 event in the long arc of history?
I think we have to see it not as a success or a failure, but as an initial cracking
Or
point.
log for the future.
A log for future reference? Absolutely.
Mm.
It marks the point where the global institutional OS, built on this foundation of economic rationality, started to face real systemic qualitative rejection from the local life OS. It's a moment people will be pointing back to for a long time.
That really changes the perspective. So if fixing EU competitiveness requires reforms that are actually outside the scope of any trade deal, and if the global system is, as you say, structurally designed to create these local losers, that leaves a pretty fundamental question for you, the listener.
When we're designing the economic systems of the future, what form of value do we need to prioritize? Is it the broad abstract economic efficiency promised by global systems? Or is it the continuity and culture that's inherent in local life?
A question to think about. Thanks for navigating this with us today. We'll see you next time.